From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
So our next author's name is Emma Donoghue. So Emma Donoghue is not only an author, she's a playwright, a literary historian, novelist, and screenwriter. Ms. Donoghue wrote the novel Room, which was made into a feature-length film in 2015. For those of you who haven't read or seen it, Room is a harrowing tale about a little boy named Jack and his mother, who are held captive in a shed by Jack's father. It's a really haunting story, for sure, but it's an incredibly moving depiction of the relationship between a mother and her child. The movie Room also has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it is certified fresh, if that provides further incentive to see the movie and read the novel. Ms. Donoghue's most recent novel, The Lotteries Plus One, came out this year in March. The novel's protagonist is Sumac Lottery, a 9-year-old girl living with her big family in a Victorian-style house. In the house are 4 parents, 6 children, and 5 pets. How many people have that many people in their family? How many people have that many pets? That's a lot of pets. Just when we think that Sumac's family can't get any bigger, her grandfather moves in with them, and Sumac has to share a room with her grandfather. This novel sounds truly delightful. Without further ado, here to discuss her works with you, Emma Donoghue. Clicker. I think this is a clicker. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hello all. It's lovely to be at the National Book Festival. It's my first time. I'm very excited. I'm particularly excited that it features sag bags. I think they should become a feature at all book festivals. First time for me, and I'm seeing the appeal. And I like the way each reader gets to occupy several sag bags if they spread out correctly. I'm going to see if my clicker works. I've never had a clicker before. It's all very exciting. Yes! I start with this elegant hand picture because when I was a kid and I wanted to be a writer, I assumed that it would involve a lot of exquisite penmanship, you know, that I'd have a very elegant hand and maybe a quill pen. And I was a bit worried that my handwriting is particularly messy. So I've been comforted to discover that the writing life has not actually had to include much handwriting. When I sign people's books and it's messy, they don't seem to mind. My writing life, in fact, looks like this. It's messy not just in handwriting, but in the mess that spreads all around me. So that was one great discovery for me about the writing life, that you don't have to tidy up. You don't even have to get dressed. So this is one of my desks here. It's a pull-out desk on which I just allow the mess to spill. And then another of my desks is any surface I can sit on in my pajamas. I was writing, for instance, in the lunchroom for the authors upstairs, and I was writing in my hotel room this morning. So my advice to young readers would be to write anywhere and don't let any day get away from you just because you happen to be sitting on a bus, say. My third desk is my treadmill desk, which I thought I'd show you a picture of because people often don't quite understand how a treadmill desk works. This is the lazy author's best friend because a couple of years ago there was a lot of publicity about how sitting down all the time was very bad for you and was likely to shorten your life. And I realized that I was spending my entire day sitting down and had been since the age of about 4. So I decided to buy this treadmill desk, and I bought it without trying it out because I thought I would probably hate it. So I hoped by spending the money on this very expensive treadmill desk that I would force myself to use it. But actually I love it. So I stand there with my laptop on the desk bit, and I walk along at several miles an hour, you know, just thinking, hands by my side sometimes, and sometimes typing a few words. And it's just great. It just lets me get my exercise while I'm writing. So this book I brought today, The Lotteries Plus One, is the first one that I've written mostly on this treadmill desk. And that's an illustration someone did of me on the treadmill desk. And what I love about the illustration is it gives the impression that the pages are actually produced by the desk, that the desk does my thinking for me, that it's some kind of miraculous dream machine. And they have not yet invented that, but if there's any clever developer in the audience, please do, because that would be wonderful if the treadmill actually produced more than, movement and static electricity. For the first year I spent on the treadmill desk, I was getting slight electric shocks all the time. And that kind of added to the, keep me on my toes, keep me awake feeling of it. And I just thought that was what it's like to be on a treadmill desk until I mentioned it on Facebook and somebody told me there's a thing you can get for $2 which stops the electric shocks. Excuse me for the transitions. My 10-year-old helped me put this PowerPoint presentation together, and she's got quite flashy tastes in transitions. When I had kids about, 13 years ago, 13 and then 10 years ago, lots of other writers came up to me and said things like, every baby costs you a book. What they meant was, when you have a baby, it's going to take a lot of time out of your life, and you'll be too busy, and you probably won't manage to write a book in those few years. But I have found it to be the opposite, that having kids was the most inspiring thing I've ever done. So this was my children, Finn and Duna, in a pair of cardboard boxes. I didn't keep them stored that way all the time, okay? It was voluntary. They liked to play in boxes and with boxes, and they liked to box each other up. So when they were this age, I heard about a case of a child being born into a kidnapping situation, and I thought, wow, a child who was growing up in a locked room, I guess he would just play with whatever things there were, And then I looked at my son and I thought, he'd be okay in a situation like that. He'd play with everything. He'd have little dances between the spoon and the fork. So that really was what inspired me to write my novel Room, in which a child who's 5 not only is growing up in a locked room, but thinks that that is the whole world. And it was also slightly inspired by something my mother used to say, and my mother had 8 of us, so that was our normal, an Irish Catholic family. She had 8 children. And my mother used to say that whenever she went into a public toilet and went in the cubicle and shut the door, she'd see our little hands coming under the door wanting her. And she would get this impulse to kind of stamp on the hands to make us go away, but she never did. She never did. But she had that feeling of, oh, please leave me alone just for 1 minute. So I thought that the mother in my book might sometimes find it very difficult to be with her kids all the time, but that the boy in the story would love it. This is my favorite piece of fan art. A fan sent this to me to describe what it was like for her to read my novel Room. She felt, you see her face in the book, she felt entirely locked into the room and scared and anxious. And although it's a scary image, I love the idea that my readers would feel as if they are absolutely living inside one of my books. That's a real thrill to me. So my kids grew up. As you can see, they're a bundle of long limbs in this photo. And as they got older, and I was reading a lot of books with them and getting so caught up in the books with them, I began to think I'd love to write a book about, not only about kids, but a book for kids. So I conceived the idea of the Lotteries Plus One. I'm showing you the French cover there because I just think it looks so sophisticated once it's in French, Les Lotos Plus Un. And I'm going to read you just the very first page from the Lotteries Plus One. In fact, this page, it's a series, and this page is going to be at the start of all the books. Once upon a time, a man from Delhi and a man from Yukon fell in love. And so did a woman from Jamaica and a Mohawk woman. The two couples became best friends and had a baby together. When they won the lottery, they gave up their jobs and they found a big old house where the family could learn and grow some more. Now, Sumac Lottery, age 9, is the 5th of 7 kids, all named after trees. With their 4 parents and 5 pets, they fit perfectly in the Toronto home they call Camelottery. But the one thing that in life that never changes is that sooner or later, things change. So this is a sketch of what the book would have looked like if I had done the drawings. I'm just trying to make you realize how grateful I am that I didn't do the drawings. So luckily, the actual drawings for the book are done by the wonderful Caroline Hadalaksono. And here's a 2-page picture of the entire Lotteries clan. So as I was saying, a big family was normal to me. 8 kids just seemed like how life was. And then when I came to North America for the first time, people were just mystified by how big a family I'd been in. But it just felt normal to us, that you'd all be summoned to dinner by a cowbell or a gong or a drum or something. and that, you know, there'd be a little notebook with all your bedtimes written in and all your pocket money written in, and it was a bit like the army and a bit like a family. So the Lotteries are not very like the Donoghues because they're a much more unconventional family. In my family, we sort of had to be home for dinner at 6 o'clock, for instance. But I did try to capture that sense of fun and busyness and a big house just full of people and their stories and their arguments and their conversations and their jokes. So the Lotteries began with the notion of a family that would have two mothers, because my kids have two mothers, so I just thought, you know, why not try that? But then that on its own didn't seem interesting enough to me, and I thought, what else could they have? So I decided to give them two dads as well. And then I thought, well, let's make sure there are quite a lot of kids. You know, let's just go big or go home. So the Lotteries expanded, and then the pets came along. So all in all, it sort of branched off in all directions. And I decided to write about a family so expansive and so welcoming that they could take a lot of different things in their stride. So there's the lovely Caroline Hadalaxonu who did all the pictures. And what I like is how she makes each character look very different. Because in a way, if the Lotteries have a kind of principle as a family, it's allowing people to be different from each other, allowing people to be not the same. So here's one of the pictures from the book. You will see that it's a scene set at an airport, and there's Lake Ontario in the background, and the famous tower in Toronto, the CN Tower. And in that, one reason I have an airport scene in that book is that I wanted to make it a book all about immigrants. The four parents are all from different parts of the world. Only two of them were born in Canada. One of them is First Nations, one of them has Scottish ancestry. And the other dad is from India, and the other mum is from Jamaica. So Canada, like the States, is a country rich in immigrants. And people have brought so much different, interesting food and music and dance and language from their different nations. And especially in an era where people often say mean things about immigrants, I wanted this book to be really celebratory of immigrants. I'm an immigrant twice myself, being Irish. I moved to England, and then I moved to Canada. So in this picture, you see Sumac in the foreground looking around for her grandfather, who's hiding behind that pillar there at the back. So Sumac is a middle child, and they often get neglected, but she's my point of view character, so she really takes center stage in this book. And in this particular picture, you see her horrified to have been banished to the attic, because she had a lovely bedroom of her own in the family's big house, but she's had to give it up because her grandfather, who she's never met before, has had to suddenly move in because he's developed dementia. So he's not thinking too clearly anymore, and he needs some looking after. And she's never even met this man before, so she's appalled to find, thank you, and suddenly she has to give up her bedroom to him. Her favorite sibling is probably her big brother, Sycamore. I named all the children after trees, but they soon started rebelling and changing their names a bit. You know, fictional characters don't do what they're told. So he shortened his name from Sycamore to Sick. Sick is a very handy little word that editors use to mean, no, leave it the way I put it, don't change it. So he calls himself Sick. And he makes his own T-shirts, so I've had a lot of fun coming up with a list of T-shirt slogans he would wear. And this one, his T-shirt says, back to front, on his front, just to confuse people. And he's sitting on his little sister there to kind of squish some of the sadness out of her. The eldest daughter is called Catalpa, and I asked Caroline to show her, you know, not smiling in most of the photographs, because she's in that phase of life where she's wearing a lot of black at 14. One thing I like about these pictures is that she manages to show so many different things going on at the same time. Like in the picture on the right, you've got a lightsaber battle going on in the background, as well as fireflies. The middle brother was named Redwood, but he's shortened his name to Wood, and he's very, very outdoorsy and tries to spend as much as possible of his time in the woods behind his house. And he's got quite excited here that his grandfather has brought to the house lots of, you know, taxidermied heads of hunted animals in boxes, which appalls Sumac. One of the types of fun I was trying to have with this book was to give the family their own kind of culture, where lots of things are, they take them for granted, like they're very eco-friendly, they're always recycling, they go out on garbage night and they salvage things and make art out of them. And many of the things that seem normal to them, like lots of vegetarian food or, interesting grains, their grandfather, when he moves in, finds all these things totally abnormal. So there's a lot of culture clash. And one of the biggest painful arguments the family has now is that the Lotteries like to save water by not flushing the toilet until they really need to. They've got a philosophy which is, if it's yellow, let it mellow. And the grandfather thinks this is absolutely disgusting, and he keeps going around flushing anytime he passes. Aspen is one of my most useful characters because she's a troublemaker. An aspen tree is always slightly trembling, and aspen is in perpetual movement. This family don't go to school. They all stay at home and homeschool, or rather they roam around and go on a lot of day trips and homeschool. And Aspen likes to get into a lot of trouble by claiming things are experiments. She'll set up some complicated combination around the house, which is likely to break a window, but she'll say she was doing it as an experiment. So she's the middle girl, and she's a great maker of stories for me. Some of the Lotteries got born into this family, and some of them got adopted. And one of the things I decided to do from the start was not make a big deal about this. I couldn't care less which of them were adopted, and I didn't ever want that to be the big, heavy issue dealt with in the book. So Sumac is adopted, and so are the two youngest children, Brian. Another interesting thing about Brian is that she says she's not a girl. She's not decided what she is, but she says, don't call me a girl. So she's going by Brian at the moment. And Brian's gender fluidity is one of the things I've had most fun with in this book. In this particular book, far from wearing either skirts or trousers, she wears a cardboard fire truck for this entire book, until in a tragic scene it gets left behind at a outdoor showing of The Wizard of Oz. And the baby of the family, Oak, formerly Owen, he is delayed because before he came to the Lotteries, somebody shook him. So Oak needs a lot of looking after, and one of the things I'm dealing with in the book is how different family members have different needs, and Sumac is really resentful of her grandfather needing looking after because she doesn't know him and she's not fond of him yet. But of course, she's totally happy looking after her baby brother Oak. So I'm looking a lot at how if a family really works, then it can be a kind of a safety net for all the different ways in which different members need looking after. Here's one of the dads, Papadum, whose birth name is Manraj, and he's the main cook. Here's the second dad, Popcorn. Quite early on, I realized that some readers would be annoyed by all these silly nicknames, but I thought, fine, I'll just wave bye-bye to those readers and carry on with silly names, because that kind of thing, if you're going to do silly names at all, you might as well have a lot of silly names and slang. So in this particular picture, it's one of my favorites. Popcorn has got his glasses entangled in a mobile of the solar system in a very expensive toy shop. Here's one of the mums. She's Mohawk, and her name is Cardamom, which is a spice. And here's the fourth parent, Maximum, who is a keen Buddhist, so she's always going off and meditating, and the kids or the cats come and bother her. In the other picture, you see her wearing a mask because she's cleaning up raccoon poo from their garden. The kind of antagonist or enemy figure in this book is the grandfather, who the children quickly name Grumps. And when I was writing this book, it was my first time writing for kids, and I wondered, what is still taboo or still against the rules in writing for children? And I found that most things are not really against the rules anymore, but there's still quite a taboo about a character smoking. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to bring in this grandfather who the kids won't like at first, then I'll make him the ultimate evil. I'll make him a smoker. So one way I'm going to show you how I write is by exploring some of the layers that go into one tiny scene. So layer one is always inspiration. There's one scene in the Lotteries which is inspired by this crazy museum in Toronto. It's a 19th century museum that they've added a wonderful crazy glass section to, called the Royal Ontario Museum. So I took my kids there to an exhibition about the culture of ancient Mesopotamia. And so I took notes on my phone. Maybe I've got particularly fat thumbs, but the notes always come out looking really messy, and then my phone auto-corrects them incorrectly. So this is what I would have written on my phone. Fin drinnig me mad dom cat's cradle all the time. And then the phone corrected it to Fun Fringe doing Cat's Cradle asthma time. And then months later, I would have looked at that and tried to figure out what I meant. And I knew there was no asthma involved in the scene. So what I think I meant was Finn, my son, driving me mad, doing cat's cradle all the time. Because he recently came back from summer camp with a woolen string and was obsessed with making shapes. So I decided it would be a good start for a scene if the lotteries were all at this museum and if Aspen, the most troublesome one, was doing a lot of cat's cradling. Then in this museum I saw this amazing ancient statue and I wrote down, "Kong statue, what if lassoed it?" And my phone corrected this to "King state, what I'd lassoed it." And I think what I meant was, the king statue, what if he lassoed it? What if my naughty son was even naughtier and if he used his cat's cradle string to lasso this ancient and priceless statue? So, you know, like I say, my kids are extremely useful to me. Anytime they behave badly in public, I think, what if that went even farther? So here's my rough draft of that scene. So this is Sumac, who's a really good girl, trying to find her troublesome sister, Aspen. And the bits I put in brackets are bits which at the time I'm not sure about. First drafts can be so messy. You can see you don't even need to be able to spell the word lassoing. She finds her big sister 2 rooms back, all alone with the 3,000-year-old stone statue and making a pretty good attempt at lassoing it with her cat's cradle string. Aspen, you want us to get totally banned from the uh-oh building for life? Oh, I should explain, sorry. And my son at the age of 3 pointed at that museum with all the crazy shards of glass and he said, "Uh-oh," and I realized he thought the museum had just exploded. So in our family, I think every family has family slang, we've always called it the uh-oh building. Her sister only giggles, sniggers, brackets justifies self. That means I couldn't think at the time how Aspen would justify it. So then the first draft turns into a sort of smooth-looking prose for the first time ever. And then the drafts that come after that are following the principle of what's called killing your darlings, which, although I've illustrated it with a picture of Finn trying to throttle his sister on Halloween, it really means look at all the bits you're really fond of and say to yourself, do you actually need that bit? Is it good for the book? And if not, cut it. I'm going to finish with one of the pictures I like best from the book where the lotteries are having a family meeting, which they call a fleeting, and they're having it on the trampoline because being the kind of family they are, they don't need to do things in the usual way or in the usual places. And Caroline also did a lot of lovely pictures for the book which are in silhouette. And I love this because it turns the whole family into a kind of a multi-armed, multi-limbed monster. It sort of brings them all together and yet you can still glimpse who the individuals are. And I suppose one of the things I'm asking in this book is love a pie? Meaning, Sumac has a feeling that by including this new grandfather, everybody else in the family is going to end up with less time, less attention from the parents, less of everything. And so really the question that she's asking herself in this book is it possible to include somebody else and love somebody else and still for there to be more than enough love to go around? Thank you very much. Any questions out there? Definitely, although The Lotteries is a series, I'm still writing for adults just as much. Yeah, I've always written in a few different genres. I've always liked writing historical fiction and contemporary fiction, and I'm feeling the same way about the new pleasures of contemporary children's fiction that, you know, they can't replace adult fiction for me. And obviously my much darker stuff I have to write for adults because, you know, there's a limit to what I'm going to put kids through. So I'm currently working on the second Lotteries one, which is set in midwinter instead of summer and is set during a big ice storm that shut down Toronto. So I've been enjoying the pleasures of, you know, writing about ice and snow and cold in midsummer.
Are the lotteries millionaires?
You know, they are presumably millionaires in that they have enough money to all give up their jobs and stay home, and that must be a lot of money. But I don't have any idea how much money they won because I've never asked them. They're just not the kind of people who talk about money much. And anytime the kids ask the parents how much money they are, the parents are like, enough, don't worry about it.
Oh.
Did you have a follow-up?
I was going to ask them why don't they live in a mansion?
Why don't they talk about the money?
Why don't they live in a mansion?
Oh, well, you know, it is pretty mansionly. You're only seeing the front of it, but it's got over 30 rooms.
Oh.
But that means a lot of housework too. So the lotteries have to do chores. So they have a big hat. They borrowed this idea from Hogwarts in the Harry Potter books. They have a big top hat with little slips of paper that mention the chores, and they have to. Their parents say, "Come and do your lots." So they pick out lots, like drawing lots, and each lot will say things like, you know, clean the cat litter trays, or, you know, roll all the bags of laundry downstairs to the basement. I've always liked books which are about, you know, funny kinds of communities, like, say, the Wombles books, where, you know, the characters in those books just take for granted that that's how their world works. So not quite pure fantasy, but books where, you know, a family is normal to itself, but outsiders would find it strange.
I have a question for you.
Sorry? Which one's more difficult? Oh, it's way more difficult to write for kids. Yeah. But that's not going to stop me, but it takes a lot of time and work because you have to put in all the same ingredients that you would for adults. You know, you can't, like, do a quickie version of anything. There has to be just as much profundity and just as much real thought in the books. But then you have to make sure that there's something happening on every page as well, and that the words are not too difficult. And often you can't assume that your child readers will have heard of things, but nor do you want to cut out every single thing that a child wouldn't have heard of. So there's a lot of, you know, dithering about every little bit of it, but it's so worth it too, because, you know, good kids' books are just the best ever. And I'm finding a lot of adults read kids' books as well. You know, there's quite a crossover audience there, and I'm always trying to get my adult friends to read really good kids or YA books, say the Philip Pullman trilogy. I often offer that to adult readers who don't think they would ever like kids' books, because, you know, these distinctions are not meant to keep us in our little reading boxes, you know.
I have a question for you over here. Sorry. You wrote it. You wrote Frog Music and Room, and those were completely different voices, completely different stories, completely different everything. And I haven't read the children's book, but it sounds like there's a lot of voices in that. How do you keep all the voices? Well, first off, how do you decide what you want the voices to be? And then how do you keep them straight?
It would be much harder to write books in which the voices were all similar. I tend to write a few things at once, or at least I'll do like a few weeks on something and then a few weeks on something else. And the more different those projects are, the better. So if I'm working on, say, a film script of Frog Music, which is what I'm doing at the moment, and then if I'm working on the second Lotteries book, there's no one sentence which could be in both those projects. So that helps me keep it distinct. But also I work hard on making the voices really flavorful to begin with. So a character like, let me think. The father, who's called Popcorn in this book, he's particularly silly, you know, so he always calls his children things like prodigious progeny. You know, he uses very theatrical, funny language, and he's always kind of flippant and a bit English. So once I've mulled over what he's like and done a list of his favourite phrases and his favourite nicknames and what he would tend to call his children, then every time I'm writing him, I'm sort of dipping in that particular paint bottle, you know. And with my historical fiction, I suppose I do a huge amount of research. So I'm really soaked in that era, and I have the kind of the slang of the time and the, you know, the rude words of the time and the sentence structures of the time as well, because it's not so much that you always have to use very 19th century words, say, when you're writing 19th century fiction, but having a few turns of phrase that sound Victorian, they really help the reader trust the whole thing after that. So really, the more different the voices can be, the easier it is for me to handle them all. You know, I suppose it's like a circus. You know, you don't want two strong men. You want them all to play very different, vivid roles. You know? Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.